On a peaceful evening in the heart of Hiroshima, apartment lights gradually flickered on as they did every day. But in a 14th floor unit, a horrifying tragedy had quietly unfolded, shocking the typically tranquil Japanese city to its core. The victim was a Vietnamese woman, gentle and hardworking, beloved by her friends. The chilling coincidence was that just months earlier, she had been attacked by a strange woman near her home. Were these truly two separate incidents? Or was it all part of a calculated plan, carried out by the same perpetrator? And when police followed the trail of bloody footprints leading out of the apartment, they uncovered a mystery no one had expected. On the evening of October 15, 2025, after a long workday, Le Van Tuan, 34, a Vietnamese national, quietly left the factory to return to his modest home as usual. He lived with his wife in an apartment on the 14th floor of a residential complex in Nakahiro, Nishi Ward, a peaceful neighborhood in Hiroshima City. The elevator gently stopped at the familiar apartment, and he softly opened the door. However, the moment the door swung open, the scene before his eyes left him frozen in shock. In the middle of the living room floor, his wife, Nguyen Tin Ga, lay motionless, her entire body soaked in blood, her hair matted against the cold tile floor. The air in the room was thick with the pungent smell of blood, silent to the point of suffocation. In his panic, Tuan rushed forward, trembling as he shook his wife awake, desperately calling her name, but it was too late. His young wife's body was ice cold, blood still slowly seeping from a deep wound on her head, dark red, gradually spreading across the floor. In a state of complete shock and panic, Tuan could barely maintain his composure. He hurriedly fled the apartment, running while calling for help, then rushed straight to the nearby Hiroshima Nishi police station to report the incident. His voice trembled and broke, his breathing rapid, but his panicked account was enough for the duty officers to immediately recognize the severity of the situation. Hiroshima is considered one of the safest and most peaceful cities in Japan, where violent crime rarely occurs. However, in the eyes of the man screaming in desperation, they understood this couldn't be just an ordinary accident, but very likely a serious murder case. Without hesitation, police immediately mobilized forces to the scene, along with emergency medical personnel. When the door to the 14th floor apartment opened, the entire scene inside matched Tuan's description. In the middle of the living room, the body of a Vietnamese woman lay face up, her long hair matted in a pool of blood, her face pale, her eyes still slightly open, as if she hadn't had time to understand what had just happened. Around the body, bloodstains were scattered everywhere, splattered on walls, on chair legs, and pooled in a large puddle right under the victim's head, clear signs that she had lost a great deal of blood before dying. The small apartment now looked like it had weathered a terrible storm. Furniture in the room was violently disturbed, tables and chairs pushed askew, several broken glasses scattered on the floor, drawers pulled open, clothing and personal items strewn about. Even the sofa in the middle of the living room was no longer intact, blankets and pillows fallen everywhere, covering the tile floor covered with bloodstains. Everything merged together to create a chaotic scene, recreating the desperate struggle that had taken place here, where the victim had likely fought back in desperation before falling. But what sent chills down the investigators' spines was what seemed like a small detail: bloody footprints winding across the floor. They began from the body's position, then connected in a clear trail leading all the way to the entrance. Each print was blurred and uneven, some clear, some just smears, as if the perpetrator had stepped in the victim's blood pool, then hastily fled in panic. For the police, this chain of footprints was an invaluable clue, evoking a haunting image of the killer's cold-blooded behavior. It didn't stop there. Another detail caught the investigation team's special attention. The security camera mounted right outside the victim's apartment door had been completely smashed, the lens shattered, the power cord ripped out. This trace couldn't be coincidental. It showed the perpetrator had prepared thoroughly and possessed very high counter-surveillance awareness, wanting to erase any images capturing their face or movements before acting. This detail also partly explained the question investigators had been pondering from the start. How could a stranger break into such a strictly secured apartment building without drawing attention? Clearly, they had calculated beforehand, knew the camera locations, the timing when the victim was home alone, and chose the right moment to act. However, for the police, the destroyed camera opened up a bigger concern. If this was a targeted attack, meaning the perpetrator aimed directly at the victim due to personal conflict, then everything could be narrowed down. But if this was just a random robbery, then that killer could potentially attack anyone else in this residential area considered peaceful. Within just a few hours after the incident, the usual quiet atmosphere of the apartment complex was completely shattered. Residents were confused and frightened, no one daring to leave their homes. Japanese police immediately sealed off all building entrances and exits, erected barriers around the area, sealed the crime scene, and began detailed investigation. Immediately after sealing the crime scene, the forensic team and medical personnel urgently conducted a quick examination of the body to determine the condition and cause of death. Medical personnel confirmed the victim had died before being discovered. When forensic experts examined the head area, they quickly discovered a very deep wound, about 2 inches long, a sharp, clean cut embedded deep into the scalp. Additionally, when gently turning the body over, they noticed numerous bruises on the victim's arms and shoulders. The shape of the bruises indicated they were traces of being squeezed tightly or struck hard. Very likely the victim had struggled violently in self-defense, trying to escape the killer's grasp, before being subdued by overwhelming violence. Police continued examining the victim's small hands and discovered important traces. Broken and scratched fingernails, containing a few small pieces of skin and hair. Signs almost certainly indicating she had fought back fiercely, trying to cling on, scratching to escape, and inadvertently preserving the perpetrator's DNA in her final desperation. When conducting a thorough search of every corner of the room, investigators realized no weapon had been left at the crime scene. They checked the bed, examined cabinets, looked under tables, in the kitchen, even the balcony area, but everything was empty. This led police to believe the perpetrator had taken the weapon when leaving, or had used an item already in the house, like a kitchen knife, metal rod, or heavy sharp object, then also took it to dispose of. This method of operation showed a high level of calculation, not only acting brutally but also knowing how to erase evidence completely. Near the body, under the living room table, investigators discovered a mobile phone, identified as belonging to the victim. Its screen was completely shattered, the aluminum frame scratched, showing the device had been struck hard or stepped on during the struggle. Clearly, the victim may have tried to call for help, but didn't have time to dial before being attacked. One of the victim's slippers had flown to the far corner of the room, while the other still lay haphazardly near the entrance. Perhaps she had just stepped out to open the door, or was preparing to go outside when she was suddenly attacked. She didn't have time to react, didn't have time to properly put on her slippers. These traces had become deeply etched in the investigators' minds, leaving a lasting impression of the case's brutality. Every small detail contributed to confirming this was an extremely violent case, executed with terrifying determination. The victim had been attacked suddenly right in her own home, where she had no suspicion whatsoever. Afterward, she had to endure successive fatal blows to the head, strikes delivered with enough force to take a human life. The chaotic scene with scattered belongings and overturned furniture was also clear evidence that the victim hadn't accepted her fate passively, but had fought back very fiercely, using her last strength to defend herself and try to escape the attacker's clutches. However, the perpetrator's overwhelming ferocity and determination overpowered all the victim's survival efforts, making the most painful tragedy ultimately inevitable and tragically unavoidable. The appearance of many bloody footprints stretching from the scene toward the door further confirmed the hypothesis that the perpetrator had left the scene hastily, in a rush immediately after completing their crime. Perhaps it was due to the fear of being discovered weighing heavily on their mind, or perhaps the perpetrator themselves was stunned by the cold-blooded act they had just committed. And therefore, the most urgent and important task for the police force at this time was to quickly follow every remaining bloody footprint, pursue every possible clue to find the hidden killer somewhere before it was too late, and they had the opportunity to erase all traces or even continue committing other crimes. While the technical team continued diligently analyzing every smallest detail at the crime scene, searching for any traces that could lead to the perpetrator, another investigation team was deployed in parallel to directly learn more about the victim's personal information. Their goal was to examine whether she had encountered anything unusual recently, had any conflicts with those around her, or anything suspicious in her daily life that could become a motive for this case. Clarifying these aspects could help them find important clues leading to the perpetrator's identity. From the husband's account, Mr. Tuan, police learned more information about the victim. Her full name was Nguyen Thi Nga, a woman in her 30s, Vietnamese national, an ordinary person with dreams of seeking a better life abroad. Nga had lived and worked in Japan for several years. Nga's husband, Mr. Tuan, was also Vietnamese, currently working for a mechanical workshop in the city with stable income, while Nga herself held a part-time job. The couple had an 8-year-old child together. However, due to their circumstances of working far from home and wanting the child to have the best nurturing environment, they had left the child with grandparents back in Vietnam before both spouses set out to seek livelihood opportunities in Japan. In their daily life in Japan, both Na and her husband Tuan were highly regarded and positively assessed by their surrounding neighbors. They were gentle Vietnamese citizens, always maintaining friendly, polite attitudes with everyone, never having any bad reputation or improper behavior in this foreign land. The couple lived quietly, worked diligently, and caused no trouble for anyone. Not just neighbors, Nga's close friends, especially within the Vietnamese community in Hiroshima, unanimously affirmed that she was a very sociable, approachable person, always ready to help everyone when needed. Nga had no conflicts whatsoever, never had disputes or arguments with anyone, whether Vietnamese or Japanese. However, amid this extremely peaceful and tranquil life picture, suddenly a small ripple appeared, disturbing the entire initial view of the victim's life. Right after the shocking murder case occurred and news spread through the community, a Facebook account named Dung posted some information that startled many people. This user claimed to be a close acquaintance of victim Nga and shared private messages, inadvertently revealing shocking information that few had known before. According to what was disclosed, not long before her death, just in recent months, victim Nga had inadvertently discovered her husband was having an extramarital relationship with another woman. Notably, this other woman was also Vietnamese, not a complete stranger, but also someone who had come to Japan to live and work for some time. And even more worrying, according to what Nga shared with friends, this woman seemed to be trying to cling to, rely on her relationship with Nga's husband to be able to continue staying in this foreign land. The reason was supposedly because her work visa was about to expire, and if she couldn't find a way to legalize her residency status, she would be forced to return to Vietnam. Not stopping at seducing someone else's husband, this other woman had even brazenly confronted Nga directly, blatantly pressuring her to voluntarily leave her own husband. This audacious action left Nga both furious and confused, as she had never imagined her marriage could be so openly challenged by a third party. In private messages to relatives, Nga had repeatedly expressed her deep sadness and helplessness about the ironic situation she was experiencing. She wrote that each day she lived in a feeling of insecurity, always having to be vigilant whenever going out alone, fearing that this other woman would come to harass or harm her. In one of the most recent conversations with a fellow countryman friend, Nga even admitted that her intuition told her something bad was about to happen. Friends had advised her to move or report to police for protection, but Nga and her husband were both in the final stage of their work contract, planning to return home in just a few more months, so they hesitated, thinking enduring a bit more time would be fine. And then, what she feared most became reality. The gentle Vietnamese woman, who came to a foreign land only to make a living and build a future, ultimately lost her life on foreign soil, becoming the victim of a brutal crime committed by her own compatriot. On the police side, while reviewing all records related to the victim, they quickly discovered a suspicious detail that could completely change the direction of the investigation. It turned out that just a few months before being murdered, specifically at the end of May 2025, Nguyen Thi Nga had been the victim of a mysterious attack right near where she lived. According to archived records, the incident at that time was handled by Hiroshima police as intentional assault causing injury, and the victim was Nga. In the report, she stated that while on her way home, a strange woman suddenly rushed at her and beat her badly. The attack happened in a flash, in an extremely panicked state, preventing Na from identifying the other person's face. However, she still remembered it was a woman with Asian features, average build, compact figure, and a voice that seemed familiar. Fortunately, right when the incident occurred, a passerby discovered it and intervened, causing the attacker to hastily flee in panic. Nya was taken to the hospital for emergency treatment with minor injuries to her hand and shoulder, not life-threatening. However, the incident left a deep trauma in her mind. From then on, Nga always lived in fear, often confiding to friends that she felt like someone was watching her. Police at that time had opened an investigation but didn't find the perpetrator, nor discovered any clear motive to pursue deeper. The case gradually faded into silence, and Nga, after a period of treatment, gradually recovered and tried to return to normal life until the tragedy occurred on October 15th. Now, with Nguyen Thi Nha dead in tragic circumstances, investigators immediately connected this murder with the mysterious assault in May. The coincidence in location, victim, and method of attack led them to believe both incidents might have been committed by the same person, or at least were closely connected. Just 2 days after receiving the case file, Hiroshima Police Department established a special investigation team consisting of about 70 of the force's most elite investigators, demonstrating the severity and special attention of the authorities. Mr. Wakabayashi, chief of the Criminal Investigation Division of Hiroshima Police Department, personally took charge of directing the entire case-solving process, showing that local authorities considered this a particularly serious case that could affect the safety image of the entire city of Hiroshima. The immediate goal of the investigation team was to quickly narrow down suspects based on all traces collected at the crime scene. Investigators understood that every passing hour was an opportunity for the perpetrator to escape or destroy evidence, so they intensified investigation day and night, determined to trace the killer's identity before they could commit any other crimes. Immediately after establishing the special investigation team, investigators got to work on their first task, meticulously analyzing the crime scene where they believed the most important clues to finding the perpetrator could be hidden. Every bloody footprint on the floor was carefully measured down to the specific direction of movement. Every small detail was recorded and photographed thoroughly. After many hours of comparison and analysis, forensic experts provided a preliminary assessment. The footprints at the scene belonged to an adult woman with not large body weight, as the footprints didn't press deeply into the floor. This person's steps were short, hurried, and slightly off rhythm, showing haste or fear after committing the crime. Particularly, the chain of bloody prints stretching from the main door area all the way to the kitchen showed the attack may have begun right when the victim had just opened the door, then afterward was dragged or tried to run toward the kitchen to escape. The bloodstains scattered right from the entrance showed the conflict erupted suddenly, almost instantly. The moment when the perpetrator either had just broken in or had been waiting outside the apartment. Analyzing the chain of traces at the scene more carefully, investigators realized this was the key point that opened up the entire case picture. All data indicated that the victim had suddenly faced the perpetrator directly at the moment she had just opened the apartment door, rather than being attacked by a secret intruder. This meant the perpetrator may have been waiting outside, monitoring and calculating the appropriate moment to strike. This hypothesis became even more reasonable when police confirmed the apartment building where the victim and her husband lived had no ground floor door lock system, meaning strangers could freely move up to upper floors without a resident card. Therefore, the killer very likely had gone up to the 14th floor and ambushed right in front of Nga's apartment, waiting for the opportunity when the victim returned or stepped outside. Not stopping there, the chaotic scene inside the apartment was also examined meticulously by investigators. Cabinets pulled open, clothes and papers thrown haphazardly everywhere, belongings overturned without any order, possibly searching for something specific such as cash, gold, or a particularly valuable item. Police then coordinated with the husband to review all assets in the house, aiming to determine if anything had been taken. However, Mr. Tuan said the couple lived simply, hardly kept much cash or valuables at home, making the perpetrator's search throughout the place puzzling. From this, investigators concluded that the disorder in the apartment might not be entirely for robbery purposes, but also a sign of the perpetrator's panicked psychology after committing the crime. Parallel to examining and analyzing the crime scene, the investigation force also urgently took statements from witnesses living in the same building, hoping to find any details that could help determine the time of the crime. Some neighbors living near the victim's apartment provided extremely important information. They recounted that early in the morning of October 15th, they heard screaming echoing from the couple's apartment. The sound rang out briefly but clearly, causing several people in the hallway to notice. However, because it was still early and the screaming was just fleeting, no one had time to run out to check, nor did they see any altercation taking place. An elderly man living on the floor below the victim's apartment recalled another detail. Around nearly noon that same day, he heard a very loud noise coming from the ceiling, seemingly the sound of a heavy object falling to the floor or being knocked over. At that time, he just thought the neighbor had dropped items while cleaning, so didn't pay attention. The autopsy examination results brought key conclusions, helping to reveal the horrifying picture of the victim's final moments. According to the forensic report, the cause of death was determined to be shock, acute blood loss, and severe traumatic brain injury. On the victim's head area, experts noted 5 to 6 consecutive serious wounds, all direct impacts with a hard object with edges, causing deep and widespread damage. This showed the perpetrator not only attacked in panic, but had struck with extremely high violence, purposefully and decisively, aiming to take the victim's life rather than simply restrain her. Besides that, on the victim's arms, shoulders, and chest also appeared many subcutaneous bruises, characteristic shapes of being squeezed tightly or struck hard. These marks completely matched the hypothesis that she had struggled fiercely in self-defense, trying to fight back before falling. Even the scratches on her fingernails showed the victim had tried to cling on or resist until the very last moment. The time of death results showed the tragedy occurred around midday on October 15th, meaning many hours before the victim's husband returned to discover the body. Thus, right after Mr. Tuan left home for work, his ill-fated wife had to face the killer alone. The fact that the perpetrator chose to commit the crime during the day in a densely populated residential area in the center of Hiroshima City particularly caught investigators' attention. This proved the perpetrator was either extremely reckless, disregarding the risk of discovery, or had calculated meticulously, knowing the victim's living schedule well. Certain this was the time she was home alone. Another important investigation avenue of the Special Investigation Team was deployed, this time aimed directly at the security camera system installed scattered around the area. Although the apartment building where the incident occurred didn't have surveillance cameras installed in the hallways of each floor, a regrettable gap in the security system. Fortunately, the main entrance of the apartment building, the elevator area, as well as surrounding streets and alleys, all had many surveillance cameras. These cameras were installed by the building management, as well as shops and eateries doing business around the area, creating a relatively extensive surveillance network. Right on the late night of October 15th and continuing throughout the early morning of October 16th, the police technical team worked tirelessly, extracting and backing up hours of recorded video from every camera with angles facing the apartment building, or that could record images of people entering and leaving this area. The purpose was to track the victim's movements in her final hours, while searching for any suspects who might have appeared near the apartment around the time the murder occurred, and their meticulous effort was soon rewarded. When carefully reviewing the video clips, investigators discovered that on the morning of October 15th, victim Nga had left the apartment and exited the building at least once, possibly to shop or work as usual. Thus, it could be definitively confirmed that before noon that day, she was still alive and well, going about her activities normally as every day. This discovery also had another important significance. It meant the screams and cries for help that some neighbors said they heard early that morning didn't originate from this tragic incident, but may have been sounds from another apartment or from outside the building. So based on the evidence collected, The highest probability was that Na was brutally murdered around midday or afternoon on October 15th. In the effort to trace the perpetrator, Hiroshima police meticulously reviewed hours of footage extracted from the entire camera system around the apartment complex, screening every frame in the time period from 8 to 9 a.m. until 6:30 p.m., the time when the husband returned and discovered his wife's body. From the security camera at the building's main entrance, investigators discovered a suspicious figure appearing at exactly noon on October 15th, a time completely coinciding with the victim's estimated time of death. The recorded image showed a woman wearing a dark jacket, wearing a mask covering her face, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, almost touching her eyebrows, average tall build, walking quickly and seemingly tense. She continuously bowed her head, avoiding looking straight at the lens, apparently very aware of the camera's presence. This woman's movement posture, hurried, alert, but trying to stay calm, immediately caught investigators' attention. About nearly an hour later, the same camera recorded this woman leaving the building, this time carrying a small handbag in her hand, different from when she entered. Although the image quality wasn't clear enough to identify her face, the characteristic of long black hair tied neatly behind her neck, the distinctive figure of an Asian woman. Before the valuable data and evidence meticulously collected, Hiroshima Police's investigation team had gradually sketched out an overall portrait of the suspect in this case. Based on the synthesis of clues from the crime scene, security camera images, along with in-depth technical analysis, they put forward initial assessments about the perpetrator's characteristics. Most likely, this was a Vietnamese woman, currently living and working in Hiroshima city area or nearby surrounding areas. The fact that the suspect lived in this area was a necessary condition for this person to easily monitor, grasp victim Nya's daily living habits, know her husband's work schedule, and choose the right time when the victim was home alone to commit the crime. Regarding the suspect's age, image analysis experts estimated between 25 and 35 years old. Particularly noteworthy, if the analysis was correct and the person appearing in the camera was indeed the perpetrator, then very likely this suspect had gotten the victim's blood on them, especially on their shoes and clothing when leaving the crime scene. Therefore, with this assumption, investigators immediately deployed a supplementary investigation tactic. They quietly monitored and contacted all hospitals, clinics, local health stations in the area, requesting to check medical records to see if anyone, especially women in the suspect age range, had come in for examination and treatment of unusual injuries. However, after thoroughly screening through all medical facilities in the region, there were no reports or records worth noting that matched their search criteria. This led to two possibilities. Either the perpetrator had the knowledge and skills to treat injuries at home without needing medical facilities, or simply this person wasn't seriously injured at all in the confrontation with the victim, perhaps only getting blood on them. And finally, after carefully considering investigation options, Hiroshima Prefectural Police made a decision to widely publicize some carefully extracted images from the surveillance camera system. These images, although not completely clear due to shooting angle and lighting conditions, were still sufficient to identify some basic characteristics of the suspect. Police sent these images to trusted contacts, units, and organizations with the best capability to assist in tracking down the suspect. The image of this mysterious woman was quickly transmitted everywhere, spreading through the community along with detailed information about the heartbreaking murder case that had occurred. The news and suspect images immediately caused the entire Vietnamese community living in Hiroshima to become stirred, shocked, and extremely anxious. Everyone was very concerned, not only because the victim was their compatriot, but also because they worried the perpetrator might also be Vietnamese. Did someone in the community hold the important puzzle piece to help police solve this case? Not long after, clues from the surveillance video began piecing together into the shape of a specific name. In the process of cross-referencing information with the residential database of Vietnamese people in Hiroshima, police quickly found a woman matching almost completely with the identifying characteristics in the footage. That person was Dinh Thi Huong, 32 years old, a Vietnamese technical intern trainee, currently living in Saiki Ward, Hiroshima City, not far from the crime scene. Huang had come to Japan through the technical intern trainee program, had lived and worked in this area for several years, had a fairly stable outward life and no criminal record. However, when investigators dug deeper into Huang's personal life, they began discovering a series of suspicious details. On social media, Huang often used the nickname Huang Cherry. This account had interactions with some other Vietnamese people in Hiroshima, including names that had appeared in the victim Nguyen Thi Nga's circle of acquaintances. When comparing Huang's passport photo with images extracted from surveillance cameras, investigators were startled because this woman's physical characteristics quite closely matched the woman who appeared at the crime scene at noon on October 15th. All this data made Dinh Thi Huang no longer just a coincidentally matching name, but had become suspect number one for the entire special investigation team. But identifying the suspect's identity was only the first step in the investigation process. Hiroshima police understood clearly that they needed to strengthen solid evidence that couldn't be refuted before they could officially issue an arrest warrant according to legal procedures. Therefore, right after identifying Dinh Thi Huang as suspect number one, they secretly monitored every step, every action of hers for many consecutive days to gather more information and avoid giving her the opportunity to escape or destroy evidence. At the same time, the investigation team also urgently requested an emergency search warrant for her residence. In the early morning of October 25th, 2025, exactly 10 days after the murder occurred, a police special task force suddenly raided Dinh Thi Huang's rented room in Seki Ward to conduct a comprehensive search. And their effort was worthily rewarded when they discovered some extremely suspicious physical evidence. First was a pair of sneakers with distinctive patterns on the sole. When brought out for careful comparison, experts confirmed this shoe sole matched completely in both size and pattern details with the bloody footprints at the crime scene. More notably, on the surface of the shoes still remained dark brown stains, looking like dried blood. Besides that, in the wardrobe, police also discovered a dark-colored jacket along with a baseball cap. These pieces of evidence were immediately carefully sealed and urgently transferred to the forensic laboratory for emergency examination. Results were delivered after just a few hours. The blood sample on Dinh Thi Huang's shoes after analysis completely matched victim Nguyen Thi Nga's blood type. This was solid scientific evidence, irrefutable, directly connecting Dinh Thi Huang with the murder crime scene. Thus, it was very clear, sufficient basis to confirm Dinh Thi Huang was the one who had broken into Nguyen Thi Nga's apartment on October 15th with intent to kill. The arrest warrant was immediately executed. Dinh Thi Huang, 32 years old, Vietnamese intern trainee, was officially arrested on charges of illegal trespass, theft, and murdering her compatriot. Japanese media described her being led away in gray clothing, hands cuffed, her face showing flashes of fear when seeing too many camera flashes from the press, but Huang remained silent without saying a word. This was the end of the killer's escape after her cold-blooded chain of actions. At police headquarters, Huang appeared shocked, but then maintained silence. Officials said currently they couldn't disclose the suspect's testimony due to concerns about affecting the ongoing investigation process. This meant Huang still hadn't confessed, but also hadn't denied. Possibly she chose to remain silent before the accusations. However, with the evidence collected this way, from camera images, crime scene traces to physical evidence found, Hiroshima police declared they had sufficient grounds to confirm Huang was indeed the perpetrator. Besides that, police also said they were carefully investigating the possibility of Huang's involvement with the assault on the victim in May to clarify the motive for the crime. The suspect's identity revelation shocked not only Japanese people, but also the entire Vietnamese community, because the perpetrator wasn't a stranger, but a 32-year-old Vietnamese woman, compatriot with the victim. And the irony was, she had also come to Japan as an intern trainee, like so many other young people yearning to make a living abroad. This truth raised many questions. Why did Dinh Thi Huang have to strike her compatriot so brutally? And was there a relationship or grudge between them? Although the case file was still incomplete, based on evidence collected, we can specifically imagine the sequence of events as follows. On the morning of October 15th, Dinh Thi Huang, who had secretly monitored Nga's family life before, she knew exactly when Nga's husband went to work, knew when the apartment was left with only Na home alone. After making sure Na's husband had left home, she quietly slipped into the apartment building and moved up to the 14th floor. When already standing before the apartment door, she rang the bell like an ordinary visitor. Perhaps not expecting anything bad to happen, Na thought an acquaintance was visiting, so opened the door without hesitation or vigilance. But the moment the door swung open, Huang immediately rushed in with an aggressive attitude. Without a word, without warning, she attacked Na violently and decisively. The attack unfolded from the apartment entrance extending to the kitchen area, showing there was a fierce struggle. Although Na tried to resist, the successive strikes to her head with a hard object caused her to collapse. Na died on the spot due to severe traumatic brain injury, blood spreading across the floor, creating a horrifying scene. Looking at the victim's body, Huang apparently had no remorse. After making sure Nguyen Thi Nga wasn't moving anymore, wasn't stirring anymore, she began rummaging, searching for property throughout the rooms in the house. She took away, stole several tens of thousands of yen in cash from the wallet and some jewelry, then cleaned, erased the clear, easily visible traces she had left at the crime scene, then calmly, composedly left the apartment. Realizing she couldn't obtain anything valuable and time was running out, Huang decided to hastily flee. Before leaving, she also smashed the security camera outside the door, hoping to erase facial identification traces. Afterward, she hurriedly left the building, leaving behind a bloody and tragic crime scene. Returning home, Huang was confident that with careful disguise from mask to baseball cap, plus having destroyed the camera, police would have difficulty finding her. She thought she had committed the perfect crime, but with the professionalism and meticulousness of Japanese police, they gradually collected every piece of evidence, every clue, and finally found Din Thi Huang just over 10 days after the murder occurred. When the case entered this stage, along with suspect Din Thi Huang's arrest, it seemed the complete picture of a brutal murder robbery had been exposed to the public. Everything seemed clear, but right when the Japanese police investigation process was still ongoing, a completely opposite wave of public opinion suddenly erupted from Vietnam. This wave made the already tragic case even more complex, tangled, and chilling than ever. Unconfirmed information began spreading quickly, and this time, the suspicion was no longer just about the perpetrator, but directed straight at another character, the victim's husband, Le Van Tuan. These rumors alleged that the motive for the case wasn't simply about money, but hidden behind was a much darker romantic conspiracy. The husband was said to have directed or indirectly instigated his mistress to murder his wife. According to this rumor, Din Thi Huang wasn't just a woman who needed money and killed, but was actually Le Van Tuan's secret lover. Therefore, Nguyen Thi Nga's death was no longer seen as the consequence of a random robbery murder, but was the result of a cold-bloodedly calculated plan, a cruel conspiracy to eliminate the legal wife to clear the way for the illicit relationship between Tuan and Huang. This shocking, stunning accusation immediately caused the roles of characters in the case to be changed, completely reversed. Le Van Tuan was no longer the devastated husband after discovering his wife's tragic death, but transformed into the figure hiding behind the cold, indifferent, and cruel curtain. His solid alibi at the time of the crime also changed from evidence-clearing suspicion to a disguise layer, a cleverly designed cover to place himself outside the circle of suspicion, outside control. Until now, all information about the illicit relationship between Tuan and Huang hasn't had any official confirmation from Japanese investigative authorities, competent authorities. Everything still only remains at the level of speculation, conjecture by the media and public. Currently, investigative work is still being urgently conducted by Japanese police. However, did Din Thi Huang truly act alone in desperation? Or are there hidden, darker relationships and schemes behind? Everything remains a mystery, only able to be clarified when official investigation results are announced. We will continue closely monitoring and updating the latest developments of this case to you as soon as official information is available. What sentence do you think will be given to Din Thi Huang? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.